Hello and welcome to episode 121 of Authors Afterword. On this podcast, I talk to an author about one, occasionally more, of their books in detail. And if you find yourself enjoying today's episode, do share it with your friends. So, I'm Charlie Place, and today I'm joined by Amy Jordan. We'll be discussing her new thriller, The Dark Hours. Set in and around Cork, in Ireland, we follow Detective Inspector Julia Hart. In 2024, Julia has very happily retired from a job she loved, but which took a lot from her. She's setting up home with her rescued dog in a quiet village, but she's been called to return to the Garda, Ireland's police force, because there are some murder cases that echo one she was heavily involved in solving back in 1994. So, the second narrative, in 1994, follows a younger Julia as she works on the case of two missing young women, which had heavy consequences for her co-worker partner, as well as Julia's health and her marriage. As readers, we know the name of the killer in 1994, but we need to learn more, and there's also that whole new case happening in 2024. Surrounding this, young Julia is struggling with the sexism she finds, older Julia still feels the ripple effects, and we need to find out what happened in her marriage. Hello, Amy.
Hi, thank you, Charlie.
This has been an absolutely lovely book to read, and I have loved your heroine, but I do want to start. Can you tell us about the inspiration?
I kept visualizing a scene, and I don't know where it came from, but it's chapter 2 and 3 in the book. The young female Garda and her partner turning up at something that doesn't seem that dangerous. So in this case, it's a noise disturbance. And I kept visualizing the female Garda walking into a house to try to help someone and what happened inside that house and then the aftermath. And so that was going to be the starting point of a book. Again, I wasn't sure exactly where that came from, and I didn't know a whole lot about the characters at the time. And I met a friend for coffee, and I told her this scene, and her face went really pale, and she said, I think if that happened to me, I would never get over it. And that for me was this light bulb moment, because I knew then I could focus on one of those characters and discuss and establish throughout the book how it affected that character. So this then was the light bulb moment that this happened in the past. And this is something my character is remembering. So then I focused on Julia and she began to grow. So the inspiration for her and for the dual timeline and for her whole character was that theme, which is now chapter 2 and 3. And my friend telling me, I actually think I'd never get over that if it happened to me. So it became about exploring how Julia got over that, or if she did, and how it sort of became a shadow that followed her whole life.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, all right. As you were saying that, I was going to say, what spurred you to start in 2024? I mean, can you tell us more about writing Julia and maybe expand on your exploration of the effects of what she's been through?
I really feel that what happened to her in that house and the death of her partner, Adrian, was this catalyst for shaping who she became. And it became almost like a noose around her neck. And at times in her life, it tightens. And then at other times, it loosens again. But she suffers this deep, deep guilt because she left him to face the killer alone. And that's an excruciating pain for her because she loved him like a brother. And as you said, she was facing misogyny in the workplace, and he was the one who took care of her. And he was the one who gave her the validation in wanting to progress in her career because her husband didn't. He wanted a different path. Understanding then that she was a person basically saddled with this guilt, this grief, as she moved through the rest of her life was really helpful in determining how she would face situations. And I think what she suffered was extremely traumatic. There's 2 killers in the book, one in each timeline, and what they suffered was extremely traumatic. But Julia approaches the rest of her life in a very different way. To ease her pain, she will make decisions that try to help people. Maybe she puts herself in the line of fire, but she needs to atone for what she did that night. And in actual fact, she didn't do anything wrong, but she considers that it was a fatal mistake and her partner was murdered because of it. So because she thinks she failed him, that's like a springboard going forward to everything else, everyone else that she tries to help. So she tries her best to right the wrongs. And at the root of that then is her sense of guilt over leaving Adrian.
That's interesting to hear, because one thing I've noticed when reading the book is that Julia does repeat what she's done again and again. I think it's like 3 times she goes into a building on her own, when the first time she knew not to do that, but she did and Adrian died. And then, yeah, she's repeating it again and again. So this is the effect of, A, her trauma, but also trying to put things right as much as she can.
Yes, and there's a scene in the 1994 timeline where one of the murdered girls, her father, grabs Julia outside the guard station, and I won't swear on your podcast, but he tells her how useless he thinks she is. And those words haunt her whole life, because she feels it's true. She feels she did the wrong thing. She let Adrian down. She let the girls down. So then when she sees the killer climb the gates and go into the Carmichael estate after Adrian's funeral, those words are inside her head again, and she can't let him escape. And then in the present day timeline, when she believes that Rosie, Reardon's granddaughter, is in danger inside the house, and Neil Armstrong's phoning her and telling her, get outside, and the power has been cut, those words have never left her, this sense that she abandoned someone that needed her. So in some ways, she's grown an awful lot, but she is still the same person. She will still put herself in the line of fire to help someone, rather than stop and think, I'm going to wait outside here for the cavalry to come, and hopefully that person's still alive when that happens. She'll always be the one to go inside. But she is wiser. She is armed. She arms herself in the 2024 timeline, and she is steadier in herself. She's learned an awful lot. She's learned how to speak to a suspect. She'd learned how to draw something out, and she's definitely wiser. But yes, I take your point, still going into places on her own, and she should wait. But it's just this absolute draw not to abandon someone to a killer's plan for them, the way she thinks she did with Adrian.
Yeah. On that, though, you're talking a lot about the other characters, and something that I've read, and I wonder if I can bring it here, because I think it might work here, is that you place a lot of emphasis on developing supporting characters, I think. Can you tell us about that? And I suppose in the context of the book as well, expanding more on this.
Yeah, so it's a very Irish thing that the people in your life are what ground you into the place where you come from. And for me personally, I have no geographical grounding, and I could live anywhere if I have this cluster of people with me, and I wouldn't miss the place that I leave. I could move anywhere. So the secondary characters are vitally important, even though Julia is a lonely person. I don't have siblings in the book for her, and I don't have friends. And that was a conscious decision. It's not to say she doesn't have them. And she is close with a female Garda she worked with, Liz Begley, but she chose to leave everything behind. So the secondary characters become hugely important in her life, and then she chooses to leave everything because of the reaction to her book, and just everything became too much. But people for Julia are her lifeblood, I guess, and they needed to feel like real people rather than just filler characters that do something. They needed to feel like her grounding force.
I thought it was interesting because I think there was something unconscious when I was reading that I noticed that sort of thing. But then reading that and hearing that you did have this focus on supporting characters was absolutely fascinating. Because, yeah, you do populate your novel with, don't get me wrong, listeners, not like tons and tons of people. You definitely know who is who, but a good amount of people and a good amount of detail, which is fantastic. Yeah. You have said about the trauma that the murderers are facing and how they've, I think particularly it stood out to me even more so in the 2024 narrative, where you have got this thing where you've got these two people who are so deeply affected by things that have happened to them. Can you talk about this and your exploration of this, the trauma and how it can make people do what they do?
Yeah. We all have our fair share of trauma of varying degrees. And I have known people in my life where I feel that it has shaped them as they've grown. And I did want to explore the dual side of the coin, I suppose, in someone's moral compass. So James Cox, or Seamus, deeply traumatized by the loss of his partner and child and blames the Gardaí that removed the baby and his wife to be, whereas Julia was deeply traumatized but blamed herself. And I think that both of those are reactions that are common, to cast the blame out or to cast the blame in. And there's a line at the end of the book where Julia's discussing with Neil what punishment Grace deserves, and she thinks that nobody is born evil, that they're shaped by circumstances in their life. So Julia is much shaped as the killers in the book, but in a different path. Hers is almost like self-flagellation in the sense that she puts herself in danger, and she won't abandon Des when he calls her back. She won't abandon the families. But focusing in on Grace, the killer in the second timeline, I'm not sure what you call this current generation of someone in their 20s.
I think it's Gen Z.
Okay. I didn't really consciously do this, but she kind of became this generation. In her showdown, we say, with Julia, she was saying, why wasn't I in your book? And she had this massive sense of entitlement to Julia. Julia's the person that rescued her. But then she began to track everything in Julia's life and read in a newspaper article that Julia doesn't believe in coincidences. But yet this girl's life was populated with coincidences that tied her to Julia Hart. Living in the Carmichael estate, living in number 36, all these things that she thought linked her. And then Julia wrote her book and she wasn't in it. And that was a tipping point for her and needed to draw Julia back into her life. And again, very, very selfish in her actions, but hugely traumatized. I wanted to explore the different approach to trying to heal your hurts. And I think they all approach it in different ways. I don't quite know if there is a cliche around dealing with trauma because everyone does it differently. But Julia does it in the opposite way that they do. So I hope that it shows different ways that people do deal with things.
Yeah, because you've got the lines about how you can be traumatized and you feel bad, but I think it's from Armstrong, he says it, but you don't kill someone.
Yeah. And Julia turns that hurt inside into herself and nearly hurts herself, but the others put it externally, and he has no sympathy for that. It's a different way of looking at how people deal with things that remain unresolved when they don't get the help they need.
Absolutely. It's the common thing, isn't it? We always say we need to give people more mental health help. And yeah, you're adding to the evidence. Okay, it's fictional. Still, the evidence, you're adding to the evidence why. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hugely important. Actually, it'd be a good idea, I think, to concentrate on Julia's book, because you brought it up, and it is on my list of questions as well. So This was really interesting because I think, there's people who've done such before where they've written a book for a certain reason and then something else has happened with it. But obviously in this case, it's obviously quite damning, as you've gone into. But can you just tell us more about creating this book and expand on that, if there's more to say?
So I needed to find a reason why this person would leave Cork and seek this solitude as some type of penance. And it just came to my mind that because she was really respected and she was really visible in her field, it would be a natural thing then that you'd be offered the chance to write an autobiography. But Julia wouldn't want to do that because she isn't interested in that side of things. But what she did was write an academic textbook. So she wanted to help younger male and female Gardaí that are coming up through the ranks and wanted to offer her insight into that.
Something that's so big in the novel, and you needed a reason for her to leave Cork. That's really fascinating. Yeah. I would like to ask you about the pacing. The last person I talked to, who's from the same publisher, she does similar, so it's interesting to have this straight after, in that you let it all play out when the time is right. Like, I carried on wanting to read it all throughout, and I wanted to find out, but it wasn't like, oh my God, you have to read it right now, you have to read it. It was a nice kind of, not quite a cozy mystery, but that sort of way in that it works, and then you can keep reading it, enjoying it, and I suppose as a reader, you're happy to wait, you're happy to find out more about the characters. Can you just talk about like writing and the pacing and in general?
Yes. The pacing is something I find very interesting in the early reviews, because a lot of people have said, I read it in a day, I couldn't put it down. And a lot of people have said, the pace was a little slow in points, and then I couldn't put it down. So there's different opinions on the pacing. How I like to think of it is, if I put my character at the edge of a forest, and the forest has lots of predators in it, but it also has lots of hammocks. So their task is to get from the entrance of the forest to the exit. And it's going to be dangerous, but there's going to be points where they're quite safe and they can hop into the hammock and take a break. So I want the reader to do that, because this was a book I wanted to bring a lot of emotion into it, and not just fear and not just adrenaline pounding. I wanted people to feel something for Julia, whether she frustrates them or whether they absolutely engage with her character and just get it. I wanted to do something where the reader gets the chance to hop into the hammock with the character and just take stock of who she is and what she wants and what has affected her. And then you're very conscious as well that you're writing a thriller. You have to have thrilling points, and you have to have this propulsive feeling to a thriller, not from page 1 to the last page, because I don't think that's sustainable. So I'm not sure how much of it was conscious, to be honest. As a writer, it was also, I needed to take breaks from the high octane parts of it and make it realistic. You know, it's not as if she has walked into a warehouse with bad guys and that's the entirety of the book. You're trying to develop the sense of place and the people in her life and her motivations, while also having this sense that a lot is happening. You do trying to move the story forward with every chapter, but that is kind of tied with the need to bring your characters to life as well. So it's trying to find the right balance.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, certainly, yeah, I would need an audio phrase because listeners are obviously not watching us, but it's kind of like boom, 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 boom. If you're carrying on doing that, you are going to miss a lot of opportunity for development of character. And like you say, building emotion, you wouldn't have as much exploration of what's going around as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And the points with Julia and Philip, her husband, those are very emotional. And you're watching someone make huge mistake here because her marriage is falling apart and she's pushing him away with every chapter. She's pushing him further and further away. And somebody said to me that when they read the last line, which is Philip saying, "Hello, Julia," they burst into tears. And I just loved it. And it felt like that was worth those chapters, which slowed down the pace. But it showed you what she lost. And you're nearly screaming at her, saying, "Stop shutting him out. He only wants to love you." And so I did really think that was a nice thing, that at the end of a thriller, somebody burst into tears because of the relationship side of it coming full circle. But it's a tricky balance, you know. It's one of those things that you want to please your readers and you want them to feel that they really want to get back to this book. But at the same time, you need to build your world. So it's a little bit difficult sometimes.
No, I think you got the balance right, because I know for me that if the world is built and there's lots of character development, that in itself is reason to come back.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I love that reaction you got from a reader. I like how you did explore that, because you have explored the side that you don't see as often in thriller. Novels with police in it, what happens to the people that are living with the person.
Yeah, and it's kind of mirrored in Des Reardon's wife, where she just resignedly passes him his coat out the door and walks away. She didn't argue, but Philip always argued and he pushed and pulled. And Julia, just her character is, you know, she said her marriage vows, but she's not obeying anybody. So she loves him, but she's not going to do what she's told. And their marriage ultimately crumbled. But it does explore the side of the partner who sees their loved one beaten and assaulted and putting themselves in danger, and the frustration when that person just won't listen and won't pull back. So there was only so much Philip could take, really.
Yeah, and then, of course, you go further in that he gets harmed as well, which is... had to be kind of the end point there. I saw it coming. I thought, no, this has got to be the end for him, as such. And end in a different way, I'm meaning. You mentioned about, like, Julia could be frustrating to the reader. How did you find her? How do you feel about her yourself?
Oh, I love her. I really love her. I have 3 friends in my life, and I'm about 20 years younger than the youngest of them.
Mm.
And Julia is all sorts of them. And I've told them this, and I've given them the book, and they're like, I don't see it, and which makes me laugh. So Julia, I think, is amazing. And the scene where she says to Neil Armstrong that if Des was younger, he would pin him to the wall. I was just so happy writing that scene. And it was just, she was someone who needed to stand on a step to feel equal to men. And I have felt that. I have felt the things she felt. And now I don't anymore. And neither does she. And so there was a joy in writing someone who felt how I felt and now who doesn't care. And I loved that. And I loved the things she's willing to do, like rescue Mutt and stand up to anybody. It doesn't bother her. And also, and I know this is funny, some people love this, but some find her annoying. But this call me Julia thing, like she revered Des Reardon until the day she exploded in her kitchen at him and told him, just stop, this is enough. And I think that was the day things changed. She stopped calling people by their title. And then as she rose through the ranks, she didn't insist on it because she considers everybody equal. She was equal to the junior guard, and she was also equal to people higher up because she considers that they're all trying to do the same thing. And that's how she treats people. And that's how she always treated people. So parts of her might be frustrating, but they come from a place of hurt, I guess. But overall, she's just straight up with what she thinks and what she says. There's no agenda. She doesn't look down on anybody. She never did. And she just wants to help. So I really love her. I find her difficult to get out of my mind. I've just finished writing the second book featuring Julia, and I just get very excited when I know I have a morning to spend with Julia. I like her company. I admire her. I know she's a fictional person, but I think she's great. And as I was saying, she's drawn from women in my life that I admire hugely, and I love spending time with them. So I love writing her.
Yeah, it's a very personal book for you then. Yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. They say write what you know, and nobody knows what it's like to be a killer or to face a killer and sit down and write a fictional book about it. But parts of the story are, feeling not good enough, feeling inadequate, feeling like the smallest person in the room, and then reaching a point in your life where you just don't care. And those feelings are long gone. That's lovely to then to put into a fictional character and let her explore that and take it on into the story.
Absolutely. And you say about the Call Me Julia, yes, I didn't find that frustrating so much as I thought there's got to be a reason here. I knew already about like the sexism and the misogyny that you are exploring, so I was thinking about that as well. And then it becomes clearer as we go on. But you talking about it here, it's made me think that I don't think there's a time, potentially maybe Des says something, but I don't think there is a time when anyone gives her a proper response in regards to that. It's there and people just move on, which is interesting.
Yeah. She doesn't really feel worthy of titles. This Adrian death never, ever leaves her.
Yeah.
Even if the sun is bright in the sky, he's a shadow behind her, trailing her everywhere. And she had huge respect, but she doesn't need it and she doesn't want it. And she wants to be equal. Only when someone is really, really brute, like Lee Murphy, and she got him to walk her dog, then you see the fire that she's capable of. But she just doesn't buy into the authority of titles. It doesn't matter to her. She doesn't need it for herself, and she's not going to respect anyone anymore because of it. But even with the Lee Murphy example, he disappointed her straight away. So she sort of got him to be her lackey and used her authority on him. But then she comes back around and she offers him chances to prove himself. And when he does, she tells him that's fine work. So she's a nurturer, but you better not disappoint her from the beginning with disinterest and disregard. and lack of respect to two people standing in front of him asking him a question. So I love that. It's just, we'll all respect each other, and then you'll get along well with Julia, and she doesn't need you to use a title.
I'm going to ask then about this misogyny, and I'm going to put two questions together because I think that will work. So can you tell us more about this misogyny, which obviously we're getting also from Julia saying, call me Julia, not Mrs. Hart. I suppose also the significance of Reardon. I think also this is going to come to the question of, can you speak about the Garda in general in the 90s, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, so I did a lot of research on that when I was starting off, and kind of traditionally I would have had a sense of things like in the teaching service in Ireland, if you got married, you would leave your position. In some civil servant roles, you would leave once you were married, or you would leave once you started a family. And that's something that I very much was aware of growing up, and very few women in positions of authority in the guards. And my teachers in school, a lot of them were unmarried women, but certainly going back into like my mother's time, you wouldn't mix being a family homemaker with having a career. It was your requirement that you would be in the home. That's completely different now. But I did a lot of research, and one of the things I was quite interested in was if you had a baby and you were serving Garda. And a lot of the articles I read online would be that, of course, you'd keep your job, but it would be a desk job and you'd work at administration. And it was considered safer for the woman. But whether she wanted to or not, it was sort of what the thing that was put in place. And around the time that this book is set, that was changing. And it had made huge leaps forward. But I suppose, like everything else, it would be sort of location specific as to how progressive something was. I don't have any direct research done into Cork City. I wasn't able to find anyone to talk to about that, but if it's not a specifically named station anyway. But Julia certainly didn't want that. She was edging towards not wanting a family. And I do remember myself saying to my grandmother that I might be a career woman. And there was this absolute horrified silence in the room. Like nobody could understand what that meant. And it was not okay at all. So that was interesting. And it was something that stayed in my mind. And it became Julia's reality that if she wanted this career and she didn't want a desk job, she wanted to progress, then she was thinking she might not have a family. And she was okay with that. Like if I had extended their relationship further beyond the number of days that 1994 takes place, and she'd had that conversation with Philip, I think their marriage would still have ended. It was not what he wanted. So misogyny, it's just like being a young girl in an office. You're just told to get the tea, basically. I've plenty of experience there, but you can kind of exaggerate it in books like Jim Connolly. I personally know several Jim Connollys, and they all would be as gruff and misogynistic as him. And they would be people I worked with 20 years ago, and you're just so glad not to work with them anymore. And everyone's aware of them. And they never quite say anything that's too far over the line that you can get HR involved, but yet it's there. And if you were to try and describe to your partner at home what they said, it's nearly out of context, and so it doesn't hit the same way. So when Jim comes to Julia's house to tell her Reardon said you're to think back over all the cases, and Philip invites him to stay for dinner and they discuss a hurling match, like she's just sitting there thinking, what the hell is happening? And that felt like something that you could really see happening, that people will think this guy is all right, but to the young woman that's working with him, he's actually horrible, and it's subtle. So I tried to bring that in, and poor Jim, he just became the character for that, because even the Stephen Malloy that is his partner, he has a problem with him, and Adrian had a problem with him, but it never goes further than just calm down, will you, or whatever. Like when he winks at Julia throughout her career, Adrian would ask him, what's wrong with your eye? But there'd never be a step further than that. Now, nowadays, hopefully, people don't do things like that. back in 1994, yeah, they did and got away with it. And it was very, very different. But in the current timeline, Neil Armstrong doesn't want to work with her, but he's not at all disrespectful. Sure, he's got a quick temper, but it's not at her. It's the frustrations of the case. But he doesn't speak in the way that Jim used to speak to Julia. So, and then as well, I was really keen to show that not everyone is like that. And it's not bashing men in the workplace, because I've worked with lovely men that I would still be friendly with. And in that book, there was Adrian Clancy, Stephen Malloy, Des Reardon, respectful men working with a young woman who never gave her any concern, any awful comments, anything derogatory. And so I wanted to show the balance in that, because throughout Julia's life and the relationships that she has had, the focus in the book is with men, sort of colleagues and her husband. And the friendship with Liz is very strong and is sustained, even though she disappeared for 5 years. But it does explore the relationship with her male boss, her male colleagues, and her husband. And I hope that readers find a really good balance in there, because my experience of men in my life is really positive, aside from this handful that I would have worked with when I was a young girl in an office. So I hope that's there in the book.
That's interesting you said it. It's hit me. I think because I was concentrating on it as a theme, I didn't maybe cotton on to it while I was reading, which sounds awful. But yes, I can't think of anyone other than Liz in that timeline who's anywhere near career-wise as Julia is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the rest of them are homemakers, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got Adrian's widow, Mary. She's a homemaker. You've got Des's wife. She's a homemaker. So yeah, and like that's very reflective of my upbringing and the majority of the women in my life being homemakers. It's different now. So the women in my life are juggling a career and running their home. But back then it was different.
Yeah. I want to ask quickly about Brendon and his Morse code. And I think definitely getting to the bit with his golf clubs and then seeing also, hang on, so this is where Julia gets the golf clubs from. You've seen where she gets the pepper sprays from. Can you just talk about including Brendon and this little plot thread?
Yeah, so again, it wasn't a conscious thing, but what Julia does for her neighbours is, again, a very, very Irish thing. You know the scene where Mary Clancy's crying in her kitchen, but the men are moving furniture to wake Adrian at home. They're making room for his coffin. The women are in the kitchen, and Julia does a very similar thing for her neighbours in that when they need her and when she has time off, she gives them her time. And I wanted to cement that in. And that could be in a lot of towns across the world where, again, your sense of place is tied into people. Brendon arrived into my mind very quickly. I knew he was going to save her, even though he's presented as elderly and probably has dementia. And I just thought he is going to be the hero of this part of the book. And he is going to be so useful to Julia. Once I began writing Julia as older, and really there's nothing different between her and me, then I realized that age doesn't matter, and someone's capabilities, it's never over. That's kind of what I was always feeling. It's never over for Julia or Des to be useful. And Brendon is a step beyond that in his age and his diminished capabilities, but yet he saves Julia. And I loved when that plot strand had formed, and it was lovely to write that. And it's just, he is a useful person in the book, despite his elderly years.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you end that bit with, he uses the golf club and then he's straight on like, effectively, where am I? I need to go home. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like we're never really lost. You know, the person is always there. And he was in the Navy, and he was a capable, strong man, and he still is. And even though he's a small character in the book, I think he's like important in the sense that, just like Julia, we never stop being able to give ourselves and being useful no matter what age we are or what we're suffering. We're still valuable in people's lives.
Yeah. Can I ask you about creating these fictional villages?
Yes, you can. So Cúnbeog means little haven. And I don't know if there is a Cúnbeog in Ireland. I searched for one, but the meaning of the words is what I was looking for. I didn't find a real place. So I've created one. In my mind, it's kind of in Wicklow or Dublin direction. It's far away, but it's based on Kinsale, which is a small town near where I live. And there's a coffee shop there which allows dogs in the courtyard at the back. So that came into it. And there's boats and there's lots of small cottages dotted around the countryside. So I knew Kinsale is going to be where she is, but I'm going to call it something that has meaning. So a little haven became there. And I don't know why, but there's a place near where I live called Crosshaven, and it has a church on the hill. So the hill would be Knock in Irish, and the church would be Chapel. So that became Knock Chapel. Now, there is a place in Cork called Rock Chapel, and there are probably Knock Chapels around the place. I was afraid to Google map that because I thought, oh, yeah, this works for me and I don't want to not use it. So I was picturing real places, but Ireland is really small and I just don't want to accidentally write a real person in a real place and end up having a situation. So I created fictional places. Now, the Carmichael estate is based on an old farm with a big stately house where I was chased by a dog when I was very, very small and scares me. But then the walled garden is a place near where I live right now. And it's a walled in garden, and there's half a wall, and then there's the metal railings, and it's all overgrown inside. And that became where Julia encounters James Cox inside the walled garden. So I did go there at night, standing outside my neighbour's walled garden, and just stand there and just take photographs and bring them home and look at them when I was writing it. But I needed to feel kind of freaked out standing there in the dark. So it's very personal in the sense that I know all these places and I can picture them and I live near them, but I did give them fictional names. I just felt it was a little safer. I don't know why.
Yeah, at some point, I think, given how many places are in countries in general, yeah, there could be someone who comes and says, oh, is it this place? And that's interesting. You've got a really spooky place and it's a real place.
Yeah, it's very close to my house. It's on my walk. I don't normally walk at night, but I did and just stared through the railings and just imagine if someone stared back at me. And imagine if I started running away and he started running parallel to me inside the walled garden, which ends at some point. So we're going to come face to face. I put Julia in that situation. And it was creepy to imagine it and walk there in the dark. So hopefully it's creepy to read it.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's a good use of location and spookiness, I'm going to say, yes. So I'm thrilled that you have said earlier that you're writing a second book.
Yes.
Given how you've left it on that note with Philip, that there was a good chance of it. Can you tell us about this?
Not really, because I don't know if it's going to be accepted as the plot. So I've submitted it. So this is the point where it could all turn out to be a completely different book. But again, it's focused on Julia returning to Cork. But there's a woman who disappears on New Year's Day, and she had told her daughter, if anything ever happens to me, find Julia Hart. So this daughter presents to the Garda station and tells Neil Armstrong the story, and Neil calls Julia. So again, it's dual timeline, setting up this new family who have had generational crimes against them that Julia and the team tried to solve in 2000. And Philip will come back into this book because I think they deserve some happiness, to be honest. Now, unless somebody comes along and tells me, no, take that out. But I want Philip and Julia to have a happy ending, really. I think they deserve it. So what I have in this book is that they're healing. They're not exactly, skipping through the fields arm in arm, but they're healing, and Julia needs a safe house for this young girl. So she turns to Philip to provide the safe house. So yeah, I hope it will be all accepted. I know there'll be a lot of editing to do, but I hope that the main plot itself will will be a success and get the green light. So that should be out in 2026, hopefully. And it was really nice to write. I tried to do something different because I just like doing that more. My editor said, look, we think we'd like to explore a second Julia book. And a lot of early reviewers are saying, I hope there's a sequel. So I sat down to write that in October, and it just did flow, to be honest. Julia wasn't done yet. So, and I'm not sure she's done still. So we'll see.
But is she happy that you've taken her back? Because she wanted to retire. She's had
No.
enough, you know.
No, not happy.
Yeah.
It was reviewed in the New York Times yesterday, and the reviewer said the last line of the review, and I thought it was just so apt. I'll just read it. Julia is a woman who has chosen invisibility, but who cannot escape what once made her visible. So I won't let her escape either. So she'll have to come back.
Yeah, it's a good job she lives in your head, because I think you'd have someone who was quite annoyed otherwise. That's interesting. I'm glad what you said about Philip, because, yeah, I think given that she is still, okay, not to her happiness, but she's still involved, and of course that's what broke them up. That's an interesting thing to explore, how you're going to get them to where you want them to be within that context. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there'll be no quick fix. 3 decades apart with somebody doesn't allow for a quick fix. But within the time they were apart, Philip read her book and he was seeking to understand her more. So he is a little bit more understanding. But Julia has also realized that sort of one of the things that could be her superpower that she fought against is that she is not the obvious person to fight back, and she is not automatically respected. And people might try and dismiss her now because she's older, and that's their mistake. But I think she's embracing that more in this book, that she can be who she really is and still get the job done and come out of it on the other side. But yeah, like she still wears her wedding ring, and she always loved Philip, but acknowledges, she pushed him away. It was too much for him to take. But he'll never turn her away, I think, now. So she wants his home as a safe house for a young woman. So he'll obviously say yes. So they're rebuilding, but it's not going to be a quick fix.
I'm going to be interested to see if you've got more books after this one in you, because it's a very interesting dynamic you've got there. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope there is more. I really do enjoy writing her character and Philip's as well.
Separately, it's interesting, and together, it's interesting. Amy, thank you very much for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure reading your book. And yeah, all the themes that you cover have been really interesting to read. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Charlie. I really enjoyed talking to you.
I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join me next time. And if you have a moment to spare, please do leave a rating and/or review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict. Thank you. Authors Afterword episode 121 was recorded on the 14th of January and published on the 12th of May 2025. Music and production by Charlie Place.